It was amazing. I was ecstatic. I couldn't even believe that I had landed it because it was a grueling couple of months for me, actually more than a year for me, because I was still in school when I started the process for applying for jobs.
In today's episode, we have Ahsan Abeer, who is a solutions engineer at Freewheel. Welcome, Ahsan.
Hey, Felix, nice to be here.
Awesome. So, first of all, solutions engineering is actually your first job after your internships, but you actually didn't know about this kind of job function before. So, for anyone else out there that might not know much about it, can you tell us more about what is a solution engineer? Like, what do you actually do?
It's a great question. To your point, a lot of people don't actually know much about solution engineering before even getting into technology and big tech. It's a pretty obscure role, and it's a great opportunity for us to kind of help people to understand what it is. As a solution engineer, and I've been at Freewheel for around 2 years now. And really, the best way to summarize what a solution engineer is, you can put it into one word that comes to mind is integration, right? That's the first word that comes to mind. And the reason for that is because a lot of the work of a solution engineer revolves around the idea of integration with products and technologies that are built in your company and the company that you're working with the clients that company has, right? As a solution engineers, my day to day really revolves around what are my clients' interests, what are their business goals, what are their technical goals, and what are they trying to accomplish, and what are the products and softwares and features that we have at our company that can help them achieve those business goals, help them achieve those technical goals. And then being that kind of end to end consultant on helping them through that integration process, right? An example of that is like, let's say, for example, your client is interested in some kind of new reporting that's available at your company because that's going to give them some nice, crisp, clear information on stuff that they're working on. And your job as a solution engineer is to essentially understand why they're asking for it, how that product helps them in achieving their business goals, and what is the technical end-to-end process to making sure that they get up and running on that, right? So as a solution engineer, you work very nicely between the sales teams and the account teams, the business side, and a lot with the engineering and product teams as well on the technical side to kind of bridge that gap in making that workflow happen. So that's why solution engineers can kind of, you can revolve around a lot of different names. We have a lot of different names sometimes, like solutions architect or product integration leads, integration engineers. Like there's all sorts of names for us out there. It really revolves around this idea of integration.
Yeah, having all those different names, meaning the kind of same job, makes it even harder for people to see the theme, to see, understand that, oh, this is all kind of the same thing, makes it even harder to know more about this role. So, appreciate you coming here and shedding light on that. So you study information technology management at school instead of like, I guess, computer science, for example. What were the kind of pros and cons of that concentration for this particular role as a solutions engineer?
Yeah, and to be frank, even with its name as an IT management, it was really like a business degree for the most part. And there were a lot of challenges that came with that when it came to landing myself into the world of technology, because you come in with this sort of focus of looking at the business side of things, but my interest was like, how do I make myself marketable to a technical role, right? Because when you're in business school, like you're learning like, oh, how does a company work and what does an organization look like and what is a corporate structure? And it was only really late into my degree that I started taking like more technical courses like Python and data analysis and such. Unfortunately, that left me in a position where I wasn't able to develop those technological marketable skills to put myself in the running against software engineers, for example. And that's actually the mindset that I was going into, right? I wanted to be a software engineer. And so, how do I market myself in front of big tech corporations that I am just as qualified to be a software engineer as someone who is graduating with a 4 year of computer science degree that has most likely done internships, has most likely done their data structures and algorithms and their software engineering knowledge and training? How do I compete myself in that regard? And that was the main challenge for me, that driving myself consistently to do my own education outside of the education I'm already doing in order to get myself at the same level as my peers that I'm going to be competing with in the job market.
How did you do that? How did you make sure that you were able to stand out and to get your own education?
Yeah, standing out was key to me, and I think that helped out a little bit where it's ironic, but not having that computer science degree pushed me further to enhance my kind of viewability in front of corporations and in front of recruiters because I had to work a little harder to make myself look like that expert that they wanted at their company. And the way I went about it was like, number one, I have to come in looking like someone who is constantly curious and hungry for knowledge. Because if I'm coming in with a business degree and I'm trying to get a technical role that requires some programming experience, some SQL experience, some knowledge around how does like APIs work and such, I have to show a level of curiosity above and beyond people who are graduating with a CS degree, right? Because they have gone through the 4-year degree to get to that stage, and I haven't done that. So I had to do the learnings outside of the traditional degree. And so I'd spend a lot of my time like, sticking to classes outside of my traditional 4-year degrees. I actually started with Code Academy, just like a regular Code Academy intensive for web design and web development. And eventually that kind of sparked my interest in going through HTML, CSS. And then eventually I did some Udemy courses and consistently pushed myself. Like I never stopped learning. And that's what I had to highlight in my interviews, in my LinkedIn, in my resume, that I'm always learning and always progressing and always moving forward so that I can make up for the knowledge that I didn't have when I was getting my degree in college.
I like that you were able to spend time emphasizing that you are hungry to learn, able to learn, that you're able to pick up things, and you should use that as a strength and not kind of hide that you had to cover more ground. I think that's what a lot of employers look for. It's not necessarily that you come in knowing everything, but that you have the hunger, desire to grow. So if you have a background in it's a mix of technical and business and client facing. So you could have gone down a route of spending some more time on a technical side and becoming a software engineer if you wanted to. How would you recommend other people make that decision when they're trying to decide whether they want to go more technical versus more business and client facing? How did you make that decision? How do you recommend other people make that decision?
Yeah. So for me, I actually went in 100% with the focus that I was going to become a software engineer. And my prospects at the time were, I was on that route and I went in with that mindset, but I certainly had a long way to go. If you want to put it into leak code perspective, I was just getting started with leak code medium. And I realized myself like I had a long way to go. And when I was in the job market, because had just graduated and it was one of my goals was like, I need to get a job right out of college. So I actually just started at software engineering, but then I had a friend who was working at Datadog as a solutions engineer. And he approached me and he was like, "Oh, I know you're looking at software engineering jobs, but you can also look into solution engineering." And that's what kind of piqued my curiosity because I was like, "I've never heard about this before. I don't know anything about solution engineering. So you explain to me what it is." And he kind of gave me the whole spiel similar to what I gave you at the beginning on like what it is. He sent me a job description that Datadog had at the time, and it kind of piqued my interest mainly because like it had that client experience plus technical experience requirement. And it was the first time it kind of hit me that technology was a lot more than just software engineering, right? Software engineering is a role. It's one of the biggest roles and definitely the role that people use to define big tech when they're thinking about technology. But it's the first time it occurred to me that it wasn't the only thing that existed. And that's when I started to do a little bit more research on what exactly solution engineering was. Turned out that it was actually a perfect fit for me because I had that client experience before I even delved into technology, before I did my internships at NYC Department of Education and before General Service Administration. I actually worked in customer service for a long time. And because of that, I actually realized like, hey, the experience here actually really fits with kind of my profile and my past experience. So there is something that I can offer that's not just a software engineering role. And that's kind of how I got myself into solutions engineering.
And I think it depends on how technical the product you are working on. But what I've heard from other solutions engineers is that oftentimes people think, "Oh, the biggest gap I have is that I'm not technical enough." But actually, I'm hearing now a lot that it's harder for people that are technical with no kind of sales or business or client facing backgrounds to transition in because a lot of times they look for that. Like that might be even maybe even a bigger priority than the technical side. I'm curious about what your experiences are like. It sounds like you were more technical probably than most, given that you were kind of on this track to become a software engineer. But what's your experience about how technical do you need to be a solutions engineer?
To your point, it depends on the product where you're working on, depends on the company that you're working on. But I mean, both sides are so important because they both kind of guide each other in a way, which is very, it sounds a little, a little strange, but they help each other when you know both of them, right? In my opinion, the sales and the consulting and the customer service side is a lot harder to train than the technical side because the technical side, if you think about it, all you have to do is just be curious. Just go out there, learn it, go open up a course and study it for like a certain period of time. But it's not the same for customer service. That requires experience. That requires you to get into the field, interact with people, explain things, right? Because you're working in a field where a lot of times you're not working with other technical people. This is a really big deal when it comes to working in something like solution engineering or product integration consulting is that a lot of times you're working with people who are not at the technical education that you are at. And so you're going to be teaching them concepts that a lot of times you're going to have to break down for them in order for them to understand. And if you don't have that kind of like experience and background and being able to break down complex, difficult to understand topics into a simplified manner, it's going to be hard for you to be that consultant. It's going to be hard for you to be a successful solutions engineer because your time goes into translating these very, very complex topics. At the end of the day, the software engineer who creates these products is handing it over to the account teams to take care of that integration. It's owned on the client or on the sales side. Go sell it to your client, go integrate it with your clients. You have to now take those very complex ideas, concepts, and translate it for the client so that they can understand what exactly that product is doing. So 100% that these days, it's a lot harder to become a consultant or a solution engineer without that knowledge in customer service and sales, but it's not impossible. I'll say that. I have seen people myself who have come from a more technical background, have come into the solution engineering role and actually learned the customer service side just by interacting with the clients and learning how to translate those details. It can go both ways. If you're not technical enough and you just have the customer service side, which is fine, you can learn the technical side. But when dealing with the clients and trying to explain the information, it's going to be hard for you to translate information you don't quite understand.
I think that's an important thing that if you come in and you only have sales or business and customer service experience, like don't discount your ability to apply for these roles that sound overly technical because the background you have, the sales, customer service, the business background you have is a top priority skill that companies look for. So speaking of like what companies look for, what is the interview process like for a solutions engineer?
Great question because it really depends on the company. I've been in interviews which are like several weeks long, and I've been in interviews that are like maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks max. It can be very fast or very slow. Really depends on what the company is looking for. But generally, what I've seen and what I've done in terms of the interviews is that you'll start off with like your general pre-screening with the recruiter. Then you'll jump into a call with the hiring manager who is going to scope what you have on your resume, speaking about your experience. And then it'll either jump into maybe one or two panel sessions. Maybe, depending on the role again, it can be some coding challenges. So just about every single interview I've been in so far for solution engineering has required some kind of documentation exercise as part of the interview process.
And for anyone out there that is looking to transition or get a job in this field, what's like the estimated salary that you should expect when you're starting out as a solutions engineer?
So depending on the company, it can range from I've seen as low as 70,000 to as high as 150,000 for a entry level solutions engineering role. So, and it obviously depends on where you're located, the industry that you're working in, and as well as how they define that role. Because there are sometimes solution engineering roles that are closer to what I would define as support engineering. And there are solution engineering roles that are closer to what I would define as a solutions architect role, which would be a much more higher paying and a much more demanding and responsible role.
So it sounded like you put a lot of effort into getting into this field, getting this job. Do you remember getting your first offer after trying to break into the field? Like, what was your reaction? Like, how did you feel?
It was amazing. I was ecstatic. I couldn't even believe that I had landed it because it was a grueling couple of months for me, actually more than a year, because I was still in school when I started the process for applying for jobs. And I really wanted to make sure as soon as I graduated, I had something that was laid out for me. And it took a little bit more than a month to achieve that goal. But even then, I was just extremely happy that I was able to meet that goal because it was a very grueling process. I was in and out of interviews every other week, every week almost. I was in and out of interviews, and I even fell sick at one point from doing those interviews. It was a very exciting moment when I got that first offer.
Yeah, it's definitely grueling. It's almost like actually having a job to prepare and to interview for these kind of roles. So I want to hear more about your day to day. It sounds like it changes each time, but like maybe walk us through, let's say, a project where you are consulting a client through an integration. Like,
Yeah, I mean, keywords you mentioned right there changes day to day. The role is very, very dynamic. If you're not comfortable with things changing day to day and you're not comfortable with something new every day, you're going to have a hard time because it is a very dynamic role. But let's say taking that example of like a new project integration, a client wants to integrate with a new product that your company has. What does the day to day look like? It starts off with the account team and even the solution engineer to scope that project, right? Like, what are the requirements? Why is the client asking for it? What is the business impact for this client? So we can prioritize how much work needs to get done and what is the level of effort behind this project. And once we prioritize and understand what the ask is, and especially what product we're looking to integrate with, we create a sort of like a high level solutions design that will guide us in that integration process. And a lot of this comes down to conversations with the client. So there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of understanding. What do they need? What do we need? Maybe it's metadata, maybe it's reporting, maybe it's sign-offs from them. What do we need from them? And what do I need to do when it comes to talking to other team members, as well as what do I need to do on maybe it's a user interface thing that I need to work on. Maybe it's understanding like what the risks are and where where I have to make the necessary changes, whether it's in their platform or it's on the backend configuration. Do I need to pull any reporting and any data that we pull that might be able to drive the decisions that we make in this integration? So there's like a number of conversations that need to be had, as well as a lot of work on the back end that needs to be done for the solutions engineer. And once we do that, it's a lot of like troubleshooting. So once we start the integration process, like let's say, for example, we light up a new integration with the client. One example that I might have is like we release a new targeting feature. Like obviously, Felix, you come from ad tech, so you might be aware of like, different types of targeting capabilities within the platform. So let's say like I enable a new targeting feature for the client. Like the client starts using a targeting feature, and one thing that we might do ahead of time is devise a testing plan. So what does that testing plan look like? We might want to start with some prototypes. We want to start with some low risk inventory or low risk parameters so that we don't affect the business at a multi-million dollar level. So we might start up with some initial tests. And after we do that testing, we have some KPIs in place and make sure that we are achieving those KPIs. And once those KPIs are reached, then we expand it into the platform as a whole. And once we do that, that's when we can consider it up and running. And throughout that whole process, we're hopefully documenting as much as we can on how that testing plan worked. Did the feature work as expected? What is the feedback from the client? What did we have to do in order to make sure that it worked end to end? What kind of API testing do we have to do in order to ensure its success? What are some reporting that we had to pull? So there's a lot of stuff, as you can see. Yeah, it can inflate into a whole range of things that sometimes might take, if it's a really easy and simple integration, it might take a week, maybe two. If it's really complex, it might be a month, maybe several months. So it really depends on the integration. But that's kind of what a day to day would look like for a project.
Yeah, so I appreciate you bringing clarity to this. What do you think is like maybe a common misconception that people might have about the role or the job of a solutions engineer?
That it requires no technical experience, actually. That I would say that's actually a misconception, that it's not as technical. And it's not because we're coding all the time. Like, there can be some coding if you wanna do, like, API testing, for example. You can automate API testing, or you can code some stuff yourself for 100%. There is some SQL work involved if you wanna pull some log level reporting. But to say that you don't need as much technical experience, I would say that that is the only misconception, only because you might not need the level of technical experience as like a software engineer. But I feel like sometimes technical experience can be diffused into only looking at it from the perspective of software development, which is not always the case, because there are a lot of stuff that you do need to know outside of software development, right? Like, what is the general information technology architecture end to end that we need to understand? How does the internet protocol work? How do APIs work end to end? How does server to server technologies work? How do we pull in reporting, and how does our reporting architecture work, right? Like, if you don't have a strong information technology background, you're going to get lost in an enormous amount of information, because as a solution engineer, you are required to understand technology at a level where you're able to almost visualize how things work end to end. And almost like you can kind of draw it and chart it out. If you ever talk to a solution engineers absolutely love diagramming and absolutely love charting. It's a very common trait for us, because we have to think about server to server integrations all the time. We have to think about how does end to end technologies work, and it's very, very difficult to understand all of the complexities and layers that are involved in, if you don't come from a technical background and you don't understand these underlying technologies. It's very easy to get lost.
So looking forward in your career, one thing you mentioned to us was that solutions engineering is a gateway to various paths in the tech industry if you want to pursue a different path. What are some other roles you think are really adjacent or really good next steps?
Great question, Felix. I mean, this is one of the things I love about solution engineering. It's the perfect entryway role for discovering other roles out there. I genuinely see it that way. My friend who invited me into the world of solution engineering when I started out told me exactly that, and it could not be more true, because of the vast amount of experience that you get with interacting with people at all levels and all verticals. You get to work and see their world from their perspective, because you as a solution engineer are kind of in a, I don't want to say a gray space, but you kind of are. You're kind of in a world where you're interacting with all sorts of people. You're interacting with your account manager for the account team and the sales team to understand sales goals, and you're interacting with product managers in order to either give client feedback to the product managers on what kind of products should be at your company, or what kind of product enhancements need to be made. Or sometimes you might even talk directly with your engineering team if there is like a complex technical troubleshooting that you need to do, and there is something that you really, really don't know, that might even come down to the code base itself, right? So you're interacting with a large number of people, and you get to live their worlds from their perspective. How does a product manager think? How does an engineer think? How does the account manager think? How does the sales team think and the sales manager think, right? And because you get to live in so many different worlds, and you yourself get to assess your strengths both from a technical and a business side, that you get to choose your own path. It's like choose your own journey. And I think it's a wonderful, wonderful role for that. It gets me excited just talking about it. But there are certainly people that I've seen and have spoken to that have actually went on the complete opposite direction and have gone the sales route. They went more on the sales engineering route, specifically because they love talking to people. And for them, they love the idea of interactivity. They love interacting. They love that customer service and bringing technology to the clients and achieving their business goals. And I've seen both sides of that world. I personally lean toward the technical side and the product side, but there you can 100% go on the other direction. And that is one of the most wonderful things about being a solutions engineer.
It sounds like a great first role too, coming out of school. If you're not exactly sure yet where you want to go, like getting that kind of exposure and rubbing elbows with people, so many people in your company in different roles. So if a friend or a family member came up to you and said, Assign, your job looks awesome. I want to become a solutions engineer as well. How would you help them decide whether they're actually going to be a good fit or not? Like what kind of questions, what kind of things would you ask them to make sure that they know what they're getting to, or know whether it is the right career path for them or not?
Number one thing I would look for is curiosity. Because to be a solution engineer, you have to be constantly curious. Like, what's happening in technology, what's happening in the world out there, researching. Because as a solution engineer, you're going to get asked a lot of questions from your clients, from people, from your team members. And one of the things you have to be really good at is researching. And so if you're not curious, it's going to get really tough to do your research, frankly. The second thing I would look for is, how do you talk to people? Like, how good are you at breaking down complex technical concepts into a simplified manner? And number three, just, your interest in technology as a whole. Like, are you interested in learning about end to end architecture? Are you interested in learning about server side implementations? Are you interested in programming? Are you interested in SQL and database architecture? If you're interested in all of those things, well, the technical side, you have it down. All you need is to be curious, know how to research your issues and know how to research through your problems, and make sure you're good at explaining those. Maybe teaching is a great way to showcase that skill. Like, if you're someone who comes from a tutoring background, a teaching background, it's a great way for you to strengthen that skill of breaking down a complex piece of information to someone who doesn't understand it at your level.
And so now you're over 2 years now in this career. What is something that you wish you knew about the job or about the role before you became a solutions engineer?
Yeah. So one thing I kind of wish I did know was, uh, I guess I wish I knew about the programming aspect of it. Like a lot of times it is hard to gauge, like, how often you're going to be coding, right? Sometimes it's like there are a lot of job descriptions out there that will say like, we require HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Python, Java. They'll say that, but how much you actually get to do that, it's very dependent on what you're working on, and it's also usually just a way to gauge like how technical are you as a person, but not necessarily what's going to be reflecting in the. So programming is not always all that important. And if anything, if depending on the role you work at, you might not never program, frankly. So one thing I kind of wish I knew more about was just how often I'd be programming, because that was a bit of a surprise when I got my first role. But it hadn't stopped me from loving technology as a whole. I still love technology. I still love programming, actually. And there are still programming concepts that do appear every now and then. There is a lot of programming concepts that will come up, and they will be very familiar to you. You just won't necessarily be the one coding behind the scenes.
What about something like AI? How do you see AI playing a role in the future for solutions engineers?
I think personally, it enhances the role of the solution engineer, if anything, because the way I see it is that artificial intelligence translates. It's actually very similar to us, to a solution engineer. We think about it, right? It helps us kind of break down these complex problems into information that we as human beings are now able to access in a way we've never done before. Like, you can ask ChatGPT now to help you find all sorts of complex information that you had to browse yourself in Google once upon a time, right? Or you are now able to make a task that was used to be very, very time consuming, not necessarily complex, but definitely time consuming. You can now make that very, very efficient through the use of artificial intelligence by being able to understand that task in a repetitive and monotonous manner. And I think as more products come out that are leveraging the power of artificial intelligence, the more powerful actually a solution engineer becomes, because your whole job is to be able to integrate these platforms and technologies to the clients. And as clients become more interested in leveraging the power of artificial intelligence, the solution engineer's job is to understand those goals, understand where does artificial intelligence play into my clients' business goals and technical goals? Does it really help them? And how can I, as a solution engineer, understand that and what my company offers in terms of artificial intelligence projects that will help them guide them through those goals, right? So I think solution engineers are in a really good place when it comes to this because one of the key aspects of a solution engineer is being that business side and that technical side. And because solution engineers live in that world of being both great at the technical side of things and understanding the technical landscape, and also living in the business landscape and understanding business goals, I think solution engineers are very well fitted to embrace the era of artificial intelligence and what it offers and helping clients guide them through those technical implementations in the future.
Agree with that. I think that solutions engineers are, I guess one way to look at it is that it's probably one of the roles that are most protected from automation. And I think it's one of the roles that are going to become increasingly necessary, us having a quote unquote human in the loop to translate between all of these, as a technical AI advancements and the actual application in the businesses. I'll leave this last question. Like, what would you say is like maybe your hottest take about the solutions engineer career? Like, what is something that maybe you believe that a lot of your colleagues don't agree with you on, or something a lot of people agree about that you disagree about? Like, what's your hottest take?
I don't really have a hot take. I just tend to learn things that often people are like, why are you learning this? Like, what's the point? Or why are you so interested in going on the back end and learning about how our reporting architecture works and how the software works and what our tech stack looks like? And, I've actually been told, like, oh, it seems kind of pointless for you to learn these things. I disagree. I think for me personally, any knowledge is good knowledge. I think learning anything helps me in my role because it just makes me better at talking about it when the time comes. Like, the more I know about our reporting infrastructure, the more light bulbs might pop up down the line when somebody's asking about like where certain reporting, algorithms take place in our reporting schema, for example, right? Like there are things where I learn it at the time and they seem completely pointless. And people tell me, you don't need to know this right now. And for me, it's just the reason why I like it is because I think it just helps me, first of all, satiate my curiosity. And second of all, I think a great point about learning other roles is that you never know when it's going to help you in your current role, right? Like I've joined conversations that are just software engineers, that are just product managers, that are just salespeople. Even though I have no reason to be there at all, I've joined those conversations just for the hell of it. And a lot of times people will say, hey, there's no reason for you to be there. I disagree. Frankly, it makes me better at my role because I understand now how your role affects mine and how my role affects yours. And a lot of times there are things that are being done at levels of the company. This is a takeaway for like anybody working at like a really, really big company, or if you're not working or you're planning to get that first full-time job offer, when you start working at like a big tech company, that's like, with many, many layers in the organization and you're going to get lost in the weeds. That's exactly the point. There are conversations that are happening that your team might not know until much, much later down the line. When you, in fact, could have benefited from it when you knew about it weeks ago or months ago. And so I like being parts of those conversations. I like learning things from other fields. It's kind of like an Avatar The Last Airbender thing where if you have all four elements and you join it together, you're all of a sudden really, really strong. It's the same thing for me. I think just learning as much as I can makes me better at what I do.
I think that's a great attitude to have. I think you really kind of take initiative and take charge of your learning, and then with that, your career path. So that's amazing. So thank you so much for coming on and all your time, Hassan. So Hassan is a solutions engineer at Freewheel.
Absolutely glad to be here and hope to talk to you soon.